Hello everyone, this is Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I'm here with the responses to the XC, or Cross Country Q&A. Thank you, of course, to everybody who has been liking or subscribing or watching any of the ridiculous things I have to say. And thank you as well to those of you who commented with some questions. Hopefully I can oblige. So let's jump right in. Number one, Edwin Perry asks, how many of these patterned shirts do I own? I think he's referring uh, to my Hawaiian shirts or animal print shirts. The answer is 21, which is not my age. Number two, Noah, everyone who reads it must confers, wants to know, where do I buy all of these shirts? Well, my wife bought some of them for me, um, but most of them come from Old Navy. They've come out with a great summer collection every year, and then I wait until like November and get them for $3 to $5. And I wear about one a week to work with the students. I especially like to wear them on a day when it's like got really awful weather as a way to just brighten up the day. So 21 shirts, most from Old Navy. He also asks, who's your favorite sci-fi author? Well, gosh, that there's really only one answer for that: Frank Herbert. But if I was going to ask, like, who are two sci-fi, who's a sci-fi author you really enjoy? Well, I'm going to cheat. I'm stealing this off of George Michael, who, when he did his best of greatest hits CD album, he put out two discs. One was called For the Heart, and the other was called For the Feet. And if this is a cross country tag, we gotta have one for the feet, which I'm gonna just redub for the head. So for the head, Alastair Reynolds, who wrote Revelation Space, he's got a whole series. He was like an astrophysicist, and his novels are fascinating. They like dig into all sorts of aspects of science fiction and sort of the physics and the astronomy in a way that's still highly interesting. So he's got these characters who have, they're like astroarchaeologists or astropaleontologists going to other worlds. He has characters who, there's like a digital plague running around affecting androids. And then Joan Vinge, she has a lot of intertextuality with Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales and some other stuff like that. So the Snow Queen, of course, if you've heard of the film Frozen or Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, you're aware of that fairy tale. And so there's this whole bizarre world where there's winter, for generations, and then there's summer for generations, and really fascinating stuff. Love them both. Who's my favorite poet? For the heart, Andrew Marvell, 17th century poet. He's got the famous Mower poems, To His Coy Mistress. I'm actually reading an anthology that has about 50 pages of poetry from Marvell, and I'm going to be doing a review of that soon. So I'll wait to read any of his poems until that video. But just know that until then, Andrew Marvell is probably my favorite English language poet, narrowly edging out people like John Donne, Percy Shelley, Christina Rossetti. Another poet, though, who I think is tremendous is Anna Akhmatova, who is a great Russian poet. I want to quickly read one of hers. This is from 1917. So, provisional government is being set up. Russian Revolution is about to happen. The October Revolution is about to happen. And World War I has been going on for 2.5 years. She writes, "We don't know how to say goodbye. We keep wandering arm in arm. Twilight has begun to fall. You are pensive, and I keep still. Let's go into a church. We will watch a funeral, christenings, a marriage service. Without looking at each other, we will leave. What's wrong with us? Or let's sit on the trampled snow of the graveyard, sighing lightly. And with your walking stick, you'll outline palaces where we will be together always." And I mean, this has kept me company for 10 years. It's an enormous volume of her poems, and I love all of them. Matthew at Maybury Book Club asks, what's the funniest novel you've ever read? Well, For the Heart, P.G. Wodehouse. This is my favorite Wodehouse novel, Right Ho Jeeves. Gussie Fink Noddle's knowledge of the common newt is unparalleled. Drop him in a pond of newts, and his behavior will be exemplary. But introduce him to a girl and watch him turn pink, yammer, and suddenly stampede for the wide open spaces. Even with Madeline Bassett, who feels that the stars are God's daisy chain, his tongue is tied in reef knots. With so many broken hearts lying about him, Bertie Wooster can't sit idly by. And Bertie Wooster is just an absolute fool. Uh, but if I had to just... So Wodehouse, the whole Jeeves and Wooster series, I love. But if I had to pick one novel, like just straight up one novel, Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy Gentleman by Lawrence Stern. This sucker is hysterical, but also teaches you a lot. It is just an absolutely brilliant novel, bursting with ideas, just digressive, tangential, all over the place, and a joy. Um, Seeking Stories, I believe his name's Ryan, asked what subjects you teach, and John pointed out that I've mentioned the binomial theorem, so or distributions, so I'm probably a math teacher. Currently, I teach college mathematics and AP statistics. I've taught everything from pre-algebra, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus, up into AP statistics. But I have just as much experience as a science teacher, biology, chemistry, physics. I love teaching physics. I haven't ever taught earth science, but I've taught like integrated science courses that wrap up the sciences, and I really enjoy teaching all of those. My favorite aspect of teaching, well, I'm an academic arsonist. I light mines on fire. So that's very fun. And also with many of the students I work with, I focus on sort of this idea of throughout human history, most of the time, a person's life is in some sense determined by who your parents are, what they did, how much money they made. And if all things are just sort of let to go, history kind of continues to win and people's lives get to be determined that way. If I'm doing well and I can light some mines on fire and really work with kids, then they change history. They get to win. So I get to joust with history. It's very fun. I enjoy it. He also asked, what are some passages from the Bible that have, made an impact on me? Ezekiel 3, 1 through 13, the famous, there's a time to, mourn, a time to laugh. And it goes through all of a time to plow, a time to sow, a time to reap. And then recognizes like that it is joyful to delight in our work. Isaiah 40, 29 through 30, the famous, even though young men grow weary, that there is a power that can lift it. We will mount up with wings like eagles. We will run and not grow weary. I mean, as a runner, that was like number one. The entire Sermon on the Mount from Matthew, but Matthew 5, 3 through 16, we have the Beatitudes. I think those are attitudes that we've lost some touch with in the 20th and 21st century in regards to your faith background. I think, when we think about what it means to be humble or what it means to be meek, what it means to thirst for righteousness, to thirst for what is good, and then what it means to be salt or light, and how we interact with each other and make an impact on each other. And that's important. That's what makes us human, is our ability to learn from each other and learn with each other. And then, of course, 1 John 4, 7 through 10, beloved, love one another, for God is love. I mean, let's go for it. Number 5, Brian at Book Wanting. So he noticed I'm a Phoenix guy. Any good fiction set in Phoenix, or memoirs, nature writing. I wish there was more good writing set in Phoenix. There's a good short story called Oxygen by Ron Carlson, set before they had built all the freeways in Phoenix, and they built the hydroelectric dams east of Phoenix along the Salt River. I'm like pointing east as I say that. The Salt River is just a couple of miles south of downtown, and it used to flood routinely, and it made life really interesting. And so there's this story called Oxygen with a guy delivering oxygen tanks. He's like a teenager, and one time the Salt River floods, and it's quite good. John Talton, I'm gonna link, I think, to his website, where he's got some great articles and pictures of sort of the history of Phoenix, which is really interesting. He's written some mysteries. Those are not as strong as his journalistic writing. Outside of Phoenix, Bad Country by C.B. Mackenzie is published in the past, I think, 5 years. Set really in the deserts outside of Tucson, but I enjoyed that. My wife liked it a lot as well. These volumes, these city noir volumes, I thought the ones that weren't the second series of classic crime stories, I thought they were quite disappointing. But I enjoyed Phoenix Noir. I don't know if it's just because I'm a hometown guy who got all of the references. Maybe they suck. And if I was from Portland, I would have enjoyed Portland more. But if you see that, you could give it a shot. And then in terms of nature writing, Edward Abbey has a lot of great stuff set in the southwestern deserts. Desert Solitaire is actually set in Arches National Park in Utah, but Abbey has a lot of solid Arizona writing. And of course, we need to recognize that it wasn't just um, United States citizens who settled Arizona and have, I hate to use words, civilized it. In fact, Phoenix itself, the many of the major roads sit on laterals for irrigation from when much of this was like citrus and cotton farmland. A number of those laterals were actually redug canals over canals dug by the Hohokam hundreds of years ago, which is fascinating and amazing. Um, so I think it's important to be aware of the Native American presence in Phoenix and in Arizona. Portable North American Indian Reader has some good Navajo and Hopi and even some Pima Indian writings, Pima tribe writings that I think are worthwhile. But by far my favorite Arizona writer is Tony Hillerman, who was Navajo. He wrote a great series set in the Navajo tribal police. And so he's got two sort of characters within the series. One is an older, sort of jaded detective, and the other is a younger detective who becomes like a medicine singer and just really fascinating look into the culture and Arizona writ large, but they're also great mystery novels. Um, First one is The Blessing Way I Lent That to a Friend. The second one is Dance Hall of the Dead, which is actually set in western New Mexico on the Zuni Pueblo. So I've got Listening Woman up here, which is set in Arizona. Great book. So not a Phoenix book, but definitely an Arizona book, and I love it. And then finally, Alan Morton asked, "Who are three of your favorite authors and why?" Well, I'm going to roll that for the head and for the heart again. So for the head, uh, I just absolutely love Emily Bronte's writing, her novel Wuthering Heights, but also her poetry. She just taps into passion and a sense of humans in nature and like that sense of power and emotion. Heathcliff's totally like the worst role model ever, um, but her writing is just crackles with energy. And then I love crime novels, and my favorite crime novelist is a guy named James Crumley, who wrote a series of books set in the western U.S. So like California, Wyoming, Montana. I think they get down to Colorado or Texas in some of them. But the Wrong Case is the first of the Milo novels, and then there's another character named Shiguru. The Last Good Kiss is the first of those novels, and I just enjoy those so much, and they're informed by that sort of like post Vietnam darkness. And then in terms of short stories, for the head, it's Jorge Luis Borges. He just wraps our minds in riddles, and I adore every word of those stories. They are so interesting, they're so funny, but they're so intelligent, and there's twists that you don't anticipate, or questions that make you just dive deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into his labyrinths. And I love his stories. He has one that is a retelling of the Minotaur from the Minotaur's point of view, and it's like 2 pages, and it's transcendent. And then Robert E. Howard. So I've got his volume of Crimson Shadows. He's got so many great characters: Conan, Bran MacMorn, the Celtic chieftain, Solomon Kane, the Puritan, uh, like uh, character out of Dumas, who's like this Puritan. Um, he's Sailor Steve Costigan. He's got these horror stories that are really great. The Black Stone, set with that sort of Lovecraftian cosmos that's so dark, without all just the rampant racism and you know. So Howard is just another personal favorite of mine. So those are my responses. Thank you again to everybody who's been sending me comments or putting up videos that I get to comment on. I'm having a lot of fun. So I hope all of you have a great week. Thank you.